Yes, my friends. It is OGP live on YouTube. Of course, we need a few minutes for everybody to get in on the conversation. If they so choose, this one will go up just as a little bit of bonus content for anyone that catches this live or on the replay. We obviously have a full episode coming up here, probably released on 12:30, 1 o'clock here on Tuesday. But because there was some news ahead of training camp, obviously getting underway today, we'll be in tomorrow. We'll talk about some takeaways, but there's a handful of moves, 4 Giants in, 4 Giants out, at least as it stands right now. And we'll break down. Is there anything significant there? Did anything surprise us as some young and old, players alike were out the door and coming in as well? Before we do, though, Andy, dive into it, as we like to say, a little bit different because it's live. You're healthy, wealthy, and wise as we always check in, correct?
I am. I'm doing great. I'm feeling great. It feels like football's back. The Giants are making a flurry of moves, Adam. So there's a lot to discuss, but I know there's first like just around the NFL, there's something that seems to be like at top of mind for everyone that we probably should talk about a little bit, right?
Yeah, and as we continue to welcome anybody in who's watching it live, yesterday on Monday's show, we talked about Kyler Murray and getting that big payday. And then just in drips and drabs, some additional information comes out where there is this little bit of an out for the average heart. And that's study time for Kyler Murray, required to spend 4 hours per week, per game week, outside of the facility on his tablet, which the Cardinals can monitor, just breaking down that film. So before we do get into full Giants conversation here, um, boy, man, I said it over on Twitter. You're comfortable giving the money, but you also don't fully trust Kyler to do his job. Like this just feels like a really unfortunate, bit of information to come out around Kyler and this big contract for the Cardinals.
Well, a couple people online have posted it already, so it's not earth shattering, but
Yeah.
this is all related to some of the comments that Kyler Murray made last year, where they asked him about his preparation. He's like, I'm just a savant. Like when I'm out there, I just see it. I know exactly what's going on. I don't need to put in the hard game film because I just will it to happen in the middle of the game. And everyone's like, so you don't study film? Is that what you're saying to me? It's like, so like it's crazy that he is like his own worst enemy by going out and saying this. But a lot of people are saying, obviously he likes to play games online and doesn't really put himself really deep into some of the film study. I laughed at this at first because it is pretty silly that you're giving someone $160 million guaranteed and you have to write in that they need to be able to do their job effectively, like when they're not in the building, which I found hilarious. But I mean, people are bashing the Cardinals for this. Like, why did you give them the money if you need to put this clause in? But think about it. Like, there's incentives in everyone's contract to do off-season workouts. And like off-season workouts are things you would think that an NFL player would be doing regardless if they were incentivized to do it. So like for me, there's always going to be clauses in there that are like, hey, when we're not here or it's the off-season or this or that, like, can we just continue to do our job effectively? Like, that's kind of why we're paying you all this money, Kyler.
Yeah, and as we welcome everybody to the live session, we're going to talk about the Giants bringing in 4 new players, letting go of 4 players as well as training camp kicks off here in a minute. But I mean, to your point, well, there's 2 things that I think about. One, it's like the tablet offsite. So is it just Kyler Murray like watching Netflix, just kind of like poking at the screen, tapping it? He's got his dog just hitting the screen, play forward, reverse. Like, yes, having clauses in, I totally get it. The other thing that just came to my mind though, as we're running just a little live here on Tuesday on YouTube with a full episode coming up this afternoon, talking about the defensive side of the football for the Giants and some expectations around certain positions there. Like, you think Tom Brady hears this and he's like, "I'll go f yourself." Like, you know what I mean? Like a guy who came in, has all this chip on his shoulder, has to, or even like, what about like a Mac Jones, right? Who comes in for New England? Let's just tie it into them. He comes in, he's not the most physically gifted guy. And what does he do from like one season to the next? Completely transforms his body, is like acknowledging, yeah, man, like I got limitations in my game. The only thing I can do is like grind it out and become as good as I possibly can be, right? Like all these dudes working. And then on the flip side of it, you've got Kyler's like, dude, listen, man, rat-a-tat-tat, man, like a jazz, baby. I'm just out there looking to get it done. Like, I wonder how that resonates even with players within the organization too. When hey, like we want to win football games here. Obviously, the results will make all this kind of not matter, and maybe even embolden Kyler to say, like I said, I just go out there and do my thing.
It is crazy to think about, like, if he hasn't been studying game film at all and he's been this successful so far in his life. Imagine if he actually does study game film, like how much better he may actually get. Like, and
Sure.
the Cardinals are banking on that. Like, hey, you're young, we get it. You don't think this is important, but as you get older, you mature, you learn that you need to do these things. Like, imagine coupling his athleticism with actually like learning the game a little bit more, or like devoting himself the way that guys like Tom Brady have done historically, or Russell Wilson, for instance, right?
And by the way, we're going to turn over to the Giants conversation here. But by the way, like it feels like, and a lot of players say this by the back end of their careers, especially the quarterbacks, like, how did you manage your diet, right? What was your off-season regimen? When you're younger, I have my fun in the off-season, then I dial it back up and I get into shape over training camp, etc. Whereas when you're older, it's like, yeah, listen, man, this is a year-round project. I have my nutritionist, I have my dietitian, I have my stretching, everything else, because you're trying to extend your career as opposed to early on when it's like, yeah, like the natural talent does allow you to take over. So hopefully it inspires Kyler Murray. I thought it was a chuckle. And maybe Daniel Jones looking at that and going, like, man, I'm busting my butt over here. Like, or imagine if Daniel Jones at any point, understanding two totally different scenarios here, but imagine Daniel Jones in training camp being like, even if
I
he
just let
came
my
out in this,
natural talent take over.
like,
I
yeah,
don't need to watch the game film. You'd be like, "Oh boy,
if
we
the
have a
quote from
problem."
today was like, under Brian Dable, I'm really going to start to dedicate myself to the film because I wasn't necessarily like totally locked in over the first 3 years, but now this is the year. That being the case, though, out as we turn our attention over to what the New York Football Giants are doing heading into training camp. Mention it there. It's inside of our comment section as well, just for anybody that wants to get the list of the players that are in there. Feel free to hop in on the comments too. Well, it could be anything, really. We're going to run this for about 20 minutes or so until the top of the hour. So if you have any Giants related questions or curiosities, feel free to throw them out in the chat. But effectively, the Giants, they go ahead and bring in a familiar face in Andrew Adams. They also have defensive end Nick Williams, formerly of the Lions and of the Chicago Bears. Offensive tackle Kamal Seymour, who has no NFL experience. And then Marcus Kemp, formerly of the Kansas City Chiefs. We can hit the guys who were obviously released in this process, but any of these names jump out or excite you in any way, shape, or form, Andy?
Well, so Nick Williams is interesting just because the defensive front, like he is a bona fide starter. He started, albeit for the Lions last year, played in every game, played 13 games the year before that. Is a big body guy along the line. Having that type of experience and being able to pick somebody up like that this late in the game is intriguing to me, based on the Giants being relatively thin on the defensive front. Like, I feel like we're a little top heavy with guys like Dexter Lawrence and Leonard Williams.
Mhm.
Maybe Nick Williams, even late to the party, can find a way to carve out a little bit of a role here for the Giants. So for me, that one kind of sticks out. Did any of the four stick out to you?
Yeah, I think looking if we look at Kemp, I thought that, well, here's a guy who obviously has ties to Kansas City. And if you think about it in terms of that wide receiver group in Kansas City and where he was stuck behind, like I went and looked at him. He went to Hawaii his last season, had over 70 catches, caught over 1,000 balls, had 8 touchdowns. Didn't come in and do anything. He's caught less than I think 20 passes in his NFL career. Had to put on a lot of weight. Came in. He's 6'3", 6'4", 175. He's now up over 200 pounds. I'll tie it to Kafka. And if you want to look at it and say, here's a wide receiver that in the spectrum, knowing we talked about this before, right? We don't know what's going to happen with Sterling Shepard, even CJ Board, any of these of the others on the roster for the Giants. It's all kind of like, yeah, whatever. Whoever makes it, I'll be excited about it. So putting Kemp into that mix, okay. If you come in with zero, I'm setting zero expectations for this kid, but if you come in and push over top of another receiver in this group, great. It's just some of these opportunities are about confirmation of, do we feel comfortable with who we have currently on the roster? There's an opportunity to say, hey, guess what? If you get beat out by a guy that has ties to Kafka, or if you look even, like Kafka may say, let's give my guy a shot. I think he can have value for this team.
I think most people will look at the four names that have come in and look at Andrew Adams as the name that is interesting to them the most, partly because he was drafted by the Giants, was here for a little while before he was let go under Pat Shermer during that type of regime, went down to Tampa Bay, had a little bit of a mixed bag, but played a little bit last year, had an interception, has NFL experience at a position where the Giants are, candidly a little bit thin after letting Jabril Peppers and Logan Ryan go. So I think that he might, I look at Andrew Adams and Nick Williams as the two guys who have NFL experience in areas where the Giants may need those guys to step up or contribute early on in the season.
Yeah, if you talk about, so let's start just with Nick Williams there for a minute. When you look at obviously the defensive front and you say, well, it's Jihad Ward, it's Leonard Williams, but then it's Jalen Holmes and it's Nico Lalos and it's, Ryder Anderson getting listed in there. We know inside that nose tackle position with Moa and DJ Davidson and obviously Dexter Lawrence at the top there. But that's the point. It's like it is NFL experience. I think on that note, I find it intriguing, I'll say, that they chose to let go of, as we didn't make it official here, just so we make it clear, released in this process were Henry Black, who formerly of the Green Bay Packers, brought in this offseason, let go this offseason. An undrafted free agent in Jabari Ellis, he goes out the door, wide receiver, and you said like 1-to-1 here, one guy in, one guy out at the same position, and actually two, if you want to throw into the fact that they also released Maurice Kennedy out of that secondary core as well. On the Williams piece first, I find it interesting that you went with a veteran guy, and obviously has NFL experience. But we've always talked about what are the Giants looking to accomplish going into this season. I think some of these moves you at least look at and say familiarity with a guy like Adams. But I do look at it and go, man, this guy's 32 years old. You're going with a slightly known commodity and maybe feeling comfortable with it. And who knows, maybe he doesn't even make it out of camp. But in theory, you're going with a little bit of veteran experience here over the possibility of, right, a young player and what could be for him. For you to Vince are trying to form a roster that can be competitive this year, as opposed to the full on every young player you want to see them develop. Because when we look into the secondary, I actually can spin it in the other direction where youth is something that I get excited about there.
So the Maurice Candidate piece was interesting. I think he was actually like our third highest rated defensive back cornerback on Madden, which is pretty funny. Where he doesn't even make the roster, before preseason starts. It is interesting because when you release Henry Black and you release Kennedy and you have Andrew Adams come in, it does feel like those two were released. They bring in Andrew to be able to really compete for that safety spot. Travis Toivonen also got released, one of our wide receivers. That was made way for Marcus Kemp to be able to come into the building. Don't know if that's necessarily going to be a move that moves the needle. But as Nemar just kind of put it in the comments, Adam, the big conversation about the workouts from yesterday was also the Giants working out Eric Ebron, who I don't know. What are your thoughts about the Giants bringing him in for a workout with a whole host of other players?
Yeah, well, I mean, the first top of the list is obviously Daniel Bellinger, right? When you go, hey, on the pup list, maybe not that big of a deal. We'll see, whatever. And then this pops up, and you go, don't tell me that it's not a big deal when all of a sudden you bring in a player in Ebron who's bounced around a little bit, Pittsburgh, Detroit, Colts as well. I think he's started with Detroit and then worked his way through those other teams. Order's not correct there. He has NFL experience, obviously. We know that he is an athletic tight end. He's a big body tight end. I'll ask you, is this more an indication that there's some concern around where Daniel Bellinger will be when you get to the start of the regular season, or that there's an opportunity maybe here to take a flyer on a guy and then look at Atkins or look at, Ricky Seals-Jones Jr. feels like the locked-in guy, but maybe this is someone who can come in and end up being your third tight end with Bellinger, assuming health, and with Ricky Seals-Jones Jr.
Yeah, so I was worried about that.
Ricky
Obviously, I've been
Seals-Jones, no
very
junior there.
yeah. I was like, Junior, interesting. So I was concerned about that too, Adam. Just seeing the corresponding moves of Bellinger being put on the pup list, and then all of a sudden we bring in another tight end for a workout. I'm thinking doom and gloom, like, oh, are we going to potentially miss regular season games with Bellinger? Is he going to be out for the first 4 games? Art Stapleton does a great job doing the beat reporting. He said he doesn't look too much into there being a direct correlation between the two. Yep. It's going to be one of the conversations at Brian Daboll and Joe Shane's press conference, asking about Bellinger, asking about what they're trying to do, how serious the injury is. Look, I actually think the Ebron situation is more around Seals-Jones and Jordan Akins than it is about Bellinger, where, let's think about Eric Ebron, for instance. He's 29 years old. Jordan Akins is 30 years old. So like they're both relatively in a similar part of their careers where maybe they have 1 or 2 good years left in them. Eric Ebron, his problem was injuries. I think he only played in 7 or 8 games last year. So having those injuries has kind of zapped him with some of that power and strength and athleticism that he's shown. I think the Giants have a tough situation. While they don't have that much money guaranteed in Seals-Jones or Akins, I think it's going to take a little bit of money to be able to bring in someone like Ebron on a team that's rebuilding. Like he feels like a guy at 30 years old that maybe maybe he'd take a pay cut to go for a team that's competing for a championship. But if he's going to sign with the Giants, are we getting him for less than $3 or $4 million a year? That to me is probably the tough part for the Giants.
Yeah, and I think it makes you wonder what's the market for him, right? He played, like I said, played last year, only 8 games, started just three, 12 receptions for 84 yards. So nothing really to show for there. The year prior, though, he caught 56 balls on 91 targets for Pittsburgh. So it's interesting to think about, like, this is a guy who has what, 351 career receptions. He never lived up to the hype of his draft stock when he was drafted by Detroit back in 2014. But he's as viable an option and as reliable a commodity as you have inside of this tight end group if they were to bring him in. So I'd find that pretty fascinating. You're also seeing Neymar mention Jared Cook. I don't know about Jared Cook at this point. And by the way, it's not even a knock on him. It's just he talk about old. Like, he's obviously old. He still can be productive. I just think it's like let's use Ebron as the barometer here. Well, if Ebron signs a 1-year deal and it kind of works out, you could fast forward this to next season and say, well, maybe it's Bellinger and then Ebron on a multi-year deal at a favorable number, and that's kind of how you look going forward. Like, potentially, you could look at a lot of different guys this way. Maybe Jared Cook is that stopgap, but it's probably bias because he would be the most experienced and has the best track record out of this tight end group. But I think if we're talking about looking to win a championship, you can pay me a reasonable salary, and I'll come in on a 1-year deal, kind of a gun for hire in that regard.
Yeah, I also don't want to bring in a truly established veteran that is going to demand to be a starter,
Right,
and
right,
we
right,
don't
right.
get
Yeah.
to see what Daniel Bellinger brings. That's not to say that I don't want competition or I don't want us to put the best roster out there. It's just I don't want a guy that we know isn't going to be here for the long-term future taking valuable reps away from guys that might be here. But
Mhm.
I find the Ebron situation interesting. I think it'd be interesting if we're comparing him with Seals Jones or Akins, who doesn't. I think Jordan Akins has $50K worth of his salary guaranteed. If they were going to make a move, I think it would correspond that way with this, releasing someone like him and building out the room. But yeah, Jared Cook to me feels like another guy that's much older. I think he's like 34 or 35. Probably looking for one of those latch on with a contender and see if you can go on a quick run towards the end of the season. I don't know if he marries up to the same timeline as the Giants.
No, for sure. And like I said, I'll be looking to hear some positive information around Daniel Bellinger, obviously, first and foremost, because now we're already hyped. We're already locked in on this kid be getting out there and being on the field. So it'd be interesting to see. The other thing is, as we see AJ Kareem mentioning Andrew Adams coming back here, there are two parts to it, right? We've talked a lot about obviously the secondary group and that competition there at the safety position. If we assume that we're talking about having, and we'll get back into. I want to touch on Eli Wolf there. I see you mentioning him in the comments, Neymar. If we assume that it is Xavier McKinney and it is Dane Belton, and then I guess we do have to look at this and say Julian Love, is he entrenched into that group as well? And now Andrew Adams can be there. When you see someone like AJ, and I'm not even knocking the idea of is he a perfect fit, veteran, experienced, obviously, experienced safety now, been around the league for a while, but with all the other guys, maybe mainly a Yusuf Corker, do you still think this is a negotiable position, that fourth, let's call it the fourth safety in that group? Or does the signing of Adams cement the idea of, there you go, that is our group now, and everybody else can be on the practice squad, maybe can come up over time and be prepared for injuries? But do you think the Giants have maybe solidified that safety room?
No, I don't think they have yet because
Oh,
they're still tweaking and moving things around. Like they signed Henry Black in the offseason. We thought maybe he was going to contribute. He's gone. They bring in Andrew Adams, which perfect low risk move for the Giants. Familiar with the organization, spent time here. I have no problem with it. But remember, Andrew Adams was a free agent. He could very easily go during the first round of roster cuts for another team if another more accomplished safety or some secondary help becomes available. I do think the Giants are really showing that Julian Love, Dane Belton, and Xavier McKinney are locked in as three of the four safety positions. I
mhm.
think the Giants are going to continue this preseason to find something that fits. And unfortunately, at this moment in time, Henry Black and Maurice Canaday were not really part of the secondary plan.
Just a little note there, as was mentioned in the comments from Chopped and Screwed. Hey, how's it going? Oh, Beefanito, man. Welcome in. Frequent flyer on the videos. Mentioning just about Ebron. He has a catch percentage, career catch percentage of 62.8, if I'm looking at that correctly here, it looks like. So you are talking about, you want to also bring in stability in some way. So even though somebody, it's like Ebron has name cachet, right? But in any of these, and it was also mentioned a guy like Eli Wolf out of Georgia, maybe he gets a chance, younger, 25 years old, try to bring him in the mix. I'll be fascinated to see about some of those other players in that group, the young guys that we talked about, right? Talked about Austin Allen transitioning into the tight end room and seeing what he can maybe accomplish. So there's a lot of different variables there. But to your point at the safety position, I think it can still be fluid. I think the name sounds familiar in Andrew Adams, but it doesn't mean that another 2-3 weeks from now, we could be talking about another guy being brought into this room, or about Yusuf Corker maybe emerging and then feeling comfortable moving on from someone else. I want to see what did Beefanito have to say here. Williams had a good year in 2019 with the Bears. Hopefully, yeah, I think he had 6 sacks back with the Bears, going back to the defensive line. Only has 7.5 career sacks. I'm fine with him as a veteran presence. It doesn't bother me. It's just, it is what it is. And I get having stability, right? You want to have some floor of expectation. And that's that balance of, well, maybe a young player could show something for you, but this makes you feel like at least we know when you need to give a breather to your starter, you have someone that's going to be able to understand the system, go out and execute.
Yeah, so I was also doing a little backstory. AJ Kareem pointed out Eric Ebron is a slower version of Evan Ingram, and
Yes, I do like that.
it is true because Eric Ebron does drop a lot of balls. He is known as a guy that through his career has had a higher drop percentage than league average, so he continues to drop passes. Someone on Yahoo
Yeah.
Sports, Greg Branos, last September, October, put out an article that basically said clear eyes, bad hands, and can't block. And so Eric Ebron is also a historically terrible pass blocking and run blocking tight end. So really,
Yeah.
do we really want to go down this path again? It feels like the Giants have a little bit of stability with an up and comer like Daniel Bellinger coming in. Ricky Seals Jones also not a great pass catcher, so maybe they're just trying to explore what they've got. It may actually be the reason why Jordan Akins ends up being on the roster, but yeah, I mean, the cost for Eric Ebron, the injuries, there's a reason why he's a free agent right now. So for me, I probably would take a pass, especially given the money that it's going to take to bring him in.
Yeah, a classic. I mean, it's a classic. Like, yeah, sure, you want to come in, maybe we see something, but we'll have to find out how that unfolds there. Outside of that, then overall, 4 guys in, 4 guys out. We're going to hear a little bit as training camp gets underway. Some of these narratives, there is, could be a topic of conversation. We'll remind everybody, if you came in as we're getting rolling here, we're going to have a full episode out here, probably 12:30, 1 o'clock release time. It talks about the defensive side of the ball, goes into some of where the team overall is being rated around the NFL, and just some of the expectations. So be sure to check that out. Tomorrow, though, we can also start to have the discussion around, this came out over on Yard Barker has their all too early 53-man roster. It's like, well, do you even know for sure who else is going to be competing for those spots here? It'll be fascinating to see how far, as we're seeing someone like AJ Kareem mentioned in the comments, that Adams is going to play a lot this year. We have a long way to go for that to be confirmed or denied. And again, based on what happens here, and we can kind of leave this maybe as maybe like the cliffhanger and the at the end of the day, so to speak, for our little live here. What does Yusuf Corker turn out to be over the course of camp should dictate how you feel about Adams, because Adams, or any veteran on this roster at any position, should not stand in the way of a young player that's proving himself from getting that opportunity. So I'd hate to see, not knocking Adams, but he's a guy, right? He's just a guy. Had a very nice, for whatever you want to use it, PFF grade last year. Only played in 3 games though. So he's looked at as, where's his best value? Small situational opportunities. I don't know if we want to thrust him back to being one of the key components of what you do in secondary. Understanding, if you look at Julian Love and Xavier McKinney and Dane Belton and you feel good about them, I don't know how much I anticipate Adams playing if he's on this roster in the season.
Yeah, and the only other thing I was going to mention, Adam,
Yeah.
is with everyone coming in for camp, we still haven't gotten the official word on the PUP list, the physically unable to perform list for the Giants. We know Daniel Bellinger was put on it last week. Once that comes out, it'll probably create more roster flexibility as well. Expect guys like Nick Gates, potentially Rodarius Williams, Sterling Shepard to probably be on that list. That
Mhm.
might free up some other roster spots where a guy like Henry Black might be pulled back onto the roster. So We're not writing off any of the guys that they've
That's true,
released
yeah.
just yet. There may be some procedural things that are happening. So over the next couple of days, there might be a few more guys coming in and out, in the door, out the door, based on some of these transactions.
And a note on like Jabari Ellis, right? That's a great young player, practice squad, right? That's maybe an opportunity for him to find his way back to this roster. And then even beyond that, when we think about a guy like maybe a Darius Slayton, I'm starting to get pretty comfortable and not excited, but I'm interested about him still being on this roster. Reality being, though, the bigger names, the more intriguing names, the names that require some financial movement, the Nick Gateses and Darius Slaytons of the world, those are going to come as camp moves along over the course of August. So waiting for that wave, it's what's maybe going to inspire a different signing, a bigger move where you go, oh, this player can mean X for the Giants. This guy can have a very specific role. I think right now I look at all these moves and say some opportunities maybe in the wide receiver room and then just some depth and some security blankets when we talk about evaluating the young talent. That being the case, man, we appreciate everyone coming in. This was kind of a spontaneous hop on. Let's do a live. Let's update some of this news. So we didn't give you as much lead time to get in on the conversation. If you want more of these, though, shout it out in the comments on any of the videos and just say, hey, some live sessions would be great. We'll try to schedule those as we work our way through camp, certainly, and have a little bit of fun. There's a lot of conversations out there. So that we'll have the additional episode coming up here later this afternoon. We'll be back in tomorrow with our takeaways from training camp, updating maybe another couple handful of moves that the Giants are going to be making here. Any parting thoughts, Andy, that you want the people to know here? Very loose, very
No, the
free,
last
very
thing I was going to
fluid today.
say is AJ Kareem keeps mentioning if Corker shines, let him play. But
Yes.
one thing I want to say is we are a very pro Dane Belton podcast here, and we think that he's going to be eventually the guy that gets on the field the most. That's all.
Oh yeah, yeah. I want, but Yusuf Corker. Let me. And I took. If you tell me Yusuf Corker over the course of camp, they go, we need not have Adams be a part of this. Yusuf Corker can be the fourth member of that room. That's what I want. Like, that's my number one box that I'd prefer. If it doesn't turn out that he's ready, that's fine. I look at that hierarchy as being very clear. We know where we want to see Dane Belton, and then we also want to see Yusuf Corker, who has a lot of versatility. So yeah, let's see him shine. Let's see a guy like Darian Beaver shine. I think we talk about him in the episode this afternoon as we look at the depth chart, and I get pretty disgusted about that. Get us on YouTube where you're watching us right now. Get us on the podcast feed wherever you get those needs fulfilled. We have some other exciting stuff coming up over the course of training camp and heading into August. So stay tuned for all that. And I will just say, we're up over 1,400 subscribers on YouTube. Man, does that mean the world to what Andy and I have been trying to accomplish over the course of the last 3 years and over this off season. Like, it was really important to us to try to show up as consistently as possible, have good conversation, give you guys great content, and get the interactions that we've been seeing from everybody. So I really, if we say it at the end of every episode, but 100% really, really appreciate everyone supporting us. Appreciate guys like AJ, Kareem, Beef and No, and all the guys, some of the familiar faces that come in and get in on the conversation. It really means a lot. So appreciate you. Continue to support us. We're going to continue to put out the quality content. We'll be back again all week long, covering the New York Football Giants. And as, even on a live stream, Andy Makowitz would want, need, and nay to make people know.
As always, let's go Big Blue.